Thank you. Can we just load? Yeah. So today we have the panel of battling trauma, the highs and lows of revolution. Today is actually the 4th anniversary of 25th January, call for protest in Egypt. And going back in time, people were fueled in injustice, inequality, and most importantly, they raised hope after the fleeing of Ben Ali in Tunis in January 14. Change is possible, and millions have joined the call in Tahrir Square and did not leave until Mubarak resigned on February 11. Citizens of other Arab countries were mesmerized, happy, and encouraged. It is possible. They saw it happening online, on TV, and some of them were actually in Tahrir Square. The protest infections spread widely and quickly, not only in other Arab countries, but all around the globe. Coming now to this day, after 4 years, or even more, activists fighting for change in these environments live under the constant fear and threat of physical harm or detainment. Many arrive for developing PTSD. Today we want to discuss the difficult fight with the panelists after they witnessed their friend self-censored themselves, immigrated to other countries, arrested, tortured, or even killed. I'm happy to be with my friends and colleagues on the panel to cover Arab region, Azerbaijan and Turkey, and China. We are going to dig in some of the different regions to bring the highs and lows about movements and revolutions. And I'm glad to introduce Amira AlHussaini. She's from Bahrain, and she is the Lina GB editor. Yes, please, upload. And she has been writing and editing stories about the region since 2005. That's a lot of time. Arzu Gaibola, she's a freelance journalist. She's currently a fellow at Trade Review Europe. Arzu covered protests in both Azerbaijan and Turkey. Lina Attalah, who's on Twitter, she's the chief editor of Mada Masr, and Mada Masr is one of the few independent online media platforms that covers Egypt. I totally recommend that you guys go check it out. And John Kennedy. John is a former Chinese language editor in Global Voices, and he's been actively covering China for around a decade. And my name is Mohamad Najem, and I'm the co-founder of Social Media Exchange Beirut, Lebanon. And I'm very happy to be with friends and colleagues here. And since today is the 4th anniversary of the revolution in Egypt, and I'm really glad we have Lina with us to talk about the highs and lows and the trauma that's happening to people and activists in Egypt. Lina.
Thank you, Najem, for this introduction, and I apologize if I seemed busy with Twitter at the beginning, but it is the anniversary, and it started off on the wrong yet expected footing. So yesterday in one of the protests that were organized in the lead up to the commemoration of the revolution today, a protester was shot dead by police forces. And in parallel to this event, the Deputy Minister of Interior made statements on television banning any protest to commemorate the revolution today, and saying that Egypt is not going to celebrate or to commemorate the January 25 revolution because it is in mourning for the death of King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia. So we are not allowed to even remember the event. So obviously I'm starting with a low point of the revolution. I don't need to talk much about the highs of the revolution. Many of you have probably witnessed the beginnings of 2011 when people in Egypt sensed a moment of possibility in the lead-up of the Tunisian revolution and the successful ouster of their authoritarian ruler over there. And the fact that Egyptians rallied for 18 days in Tahrir Square and at the end of the rally managed to actually impose the deposition of the president back then, Hosni Mubarak, was definitely not only a high moment but also a moment where people sense that they can do something, that dissident politics can actually be conducive to change. The 3 years that followed this moment were a constant negotiation process that were interparsed with protests, clashes, and many, many losses, very few victories. And I was highly engaged in covering it through my job as a journalist and with my team of young journalists. And throughout that process, we would normally experience, breakdowns, and I always was in a responsibility of handling those breakdowns of journalists, especially if they see protesters dying in front of them when they actually go through the experience of endangering themselves and come back to the office being completely broken down. So this is something that we've been dealing with throughout the 3 years, but we were dealing with them in the spirit of an ongoing revolution until a critical moment happened in mid-2013. One or two critical points. One is much more personal and the other is global with regards to Egypt. The personal moment in 2013 is that our team of journalists lost their jobs in the mainstream newspaper we were working at because of disagreements over our politics, but also because of financial restraints upon which they decided to basically sacrifice the edition that we were working on. So we found ourselves in the street, but we were still caught up, I think, in some sort of a revolutionary moment. So we came together and built the news media that Najem referred to, Mada Masr, and we like to call Mada Masr as a child of crisis, but at the same time also as a site of hope, of politics of hope, basically. So it's a site where we actively practice politics of hope by continuing to write about the revolution, continuing to unpack what the revolution needs. But then the other critical moment, which is the more general moment and not just personal, is the moment when we were caught up covering yet another very deadly clashes between police and protesters in the campsite that was mostly that of Muslim Brotherhood protesters. And I don't need to bore you too much with the political details of the conflict. But what happened that day, the 14th of August 2013, is that in the span of 7 hours, 1,000 protesters were killed by military and security forces in one campsite. And we were there covering it, we came home or to the office to try to write about the horrific experience of the day, including running under a barrage of bullets throughout the whole day. And we put as much as possible of our emotional experience in writing this because it was a very moving day. And not only the coverage, the act of covering this massacre was, I would say, traumatizing in many ways, But what was equally extremely afflicting is the fact that nobody would listen to us. This is the point at which a political polarization in Egypt led to a complete loss of empathy from a group of people in the country towards another group of people. And what seemed to be, an ongoing revolution was definitely feeling more like a devastating end of it, an end that doesn't even want to come. Ever since that moment, August 2013, I have been handling all sorts of unsettlement within my team, which is in many ways emblematic of the more overall unsettlement that a lot of people in Egypt are experiencing. So some people have been disengaging completely, and in their disengagement there is an active tendency to opt out because there is no interest in what's happening. Some people had to leave in order to follow a professional psychological treatment, and not everything is post-traumatic stress disorder. There are so many other things that people have been suffering from anxiety to clinical depression to all sorts of issues that even transcend the ability of psychiatric sciences to diagnose. Some people had to leave the country out of fear because they were chased. Some people have been trying so hard to survive, but in surviving, in this active attempt to survive, they have also been dealing with their own mental unsettlement from all what's going on in Egypt right now. I'd like to end my introductory notes by saying that I myself, having to go through this with myself and with the team of people I'm working with, I often stumble upon very deep moments of loss of meaning in Egypt, and sometimes even loss of purpose, even though I run one of the most, if not the only independent media outlet in the country today. I guess I stop this sentiment by reminding myself that revolution is nothing but a historical development in which aftermath we're living. It's not supposed to be an event that ends with a certain success or a certain failure, and I think it's historically even incorrect to think about it this way. So what we're going through there is some sort of inevitability in what we're going through, and negotiating with it becomes the only normal sort of outcome of this difficulty. I'll stop there and eager to hear what others have to say.
Thank you so much, Lina. That was really great to know all these details. So Egypt was really harsh, and it still is. Someone was actually killed today or yesterday because of the protests. We're gonna go to a different places. We're gonna go to a different language. Maybe a little bit similarity in some cultures. We're going to go to Azerbaijan and Turkey. We want to know more about the people on the street, what they do. To you, Arzu.
Thank you. I'll start with Azerbaijan because that's where I'm from. I guess we haven't had a revolution in Azerbaijan. There have been attempts to have a revolution, but so far we haven't had one. And it started with 2011 when a lot of young people, including me, were inspired by what was happening in the Arab world. And we also wanted to have this feeling of emotional excitement, this feeling of passion, of bringing change to our country. And in an attempt, we created this hashtag along with a Facebook page, simply calling it a Great People's Day in Azerbaijan or something like this. And we wanted to people, we knew that protesting in the streets is going to be problematic because the government has been very, very strong in cracking down on protests in the past 10, 15 years. And so we decided that, okay, let's start from social media and see what will be the reaction. And it was incredible because immediately it was over 20,000 people decided to like the page, and everyone was very excited that yes, we're going to go on the streets, even though people realized that by going on the streets, they will get arrested. And this is what happened. On the day of the protest, there were random groups forming in random spots of the capital, and most of them were not even able to reach the main square, because either there was a lot of police on the squares, either the police was already at the metro stations where people were hoping to gather and walk to the square. And this sort of triggered this wave of unrest that came afterwards. Although people were arrested that day, it was amazing to see that the hope was still there. And so this sort of ignited a wave of many other protests to come. And in the past, since 2011, I would say we've seen several protests shaking up Azerbaijan, and not just in the capital, which has been really interesting, but also in the other towns of Azerbaijan. And again, organizing a protest for anyone in Azerbaijan, it's clear that they're going to get arrested. There will be more police than the protesters themselves. And despite of that, it still continues. And the last protest we've had was very was recently was against the municipal elections, because everyone knew that even though we're having municipal elections, we're not actually having municipal elections, because the decision was made way in advance of who is going to be elected, which has been the case with the presidential elections and also the parliamentary elections. So in November of this year, we're going to have parliamentary elections, and of course we know who is going to be seated in that parliament after the elections. So this has been sort of in between the low and the high, because people have been getting really upset because a lot of our friends are in jail. A lot of my friends are in jail because of these protests, but also a lot of my friends are in jail for covering this protest. For uncovering the truth about the government and the officials. And so we decided, and it's clear that the protest will continue to happen, but this will be the outcome. But again, the high is that the people still have the hope that this will change eventually. The government will change eventually. Now, I moved to Turkey in 2010, and I was back and forth between Azerbaijan and Turkey, but last year I was, into that summer of Gezi protests, I was lucky to be part of it. I was there in Taksim Square on the third day of the protest, and it was my first time covering a protest with my camera. I've never done it before, so I just went there. I had no tear gas camera. I didn't have a tear gas mask. I only had a scarf, and I realized that scarf is not going to protect me from tear gas. And but I think the high of that was just seeing so many people. I mean, it started with just a small group of environmentalists fighting to protect this tiny little park that's in the heart of Istanbul and Taksim Square. And eventually, when the police reacted with burning their tents and firing rubber bullets and tear gas, the way it grew within the span of literally 3 days, it was incredible. First it was a group of 10, 15, then it was a group of hundreds, and then there were thousands. And on the third day, when I saw Istiklal, which is the main avenue, there were, I don't know, hundreds and thousands of young people standing on the street. But of course it also has the lows. And there have been deaths, and I guess, to me personally, we were very much affected with the death of a 14-year-old kid who was shot with a rubber bullet when he went to buy bread, and he was in a coma, and he passed away. And so to commemorate his death, a year later, people took the streets of Istanbul, and most of them were holding bread in their hands. And this was a very, again, emotional and yet very strong and sort of emotionally strong moment for people in Turkey, because the unity, even though the revolution, the Gezi protests didn't manage to change the government. Erdogan not only stayed in power, he was also elected to be the president. But it really the Gezi protest brought people of Turkey together, which I think is really important. Because for a while, everyone was sort of complaining about the situation, but no one was really, there was not really such a big movement. And I'm really honored to be part of that, and I'm actually really honored to see these two countries see so much pain and yet still have the hope and strength to go on.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. From Azerbaijan and Turkey, we're gonna go to China, which is a monster country. And we want to know more from John. What happened in China? Like, many of us really do not know what really happened in China in terms of Jasmine Revolution or any kind of different movements that happened. How was the community interacting with it? What were the highs, the lows? Cases, people went to jail, people were happy, people get married, like all these details. Tell us more about it.
Well, in a word, I think community, for me, in a word, it's all about community. Sorry, I am getting a bit worked up talking about this because this is something that people just don't talk about, or I haven't had a chance to really talk about. So bear with me. I think, I would start with the fact that China, as an East Asian culture, people don't talk about their emotions, and looking at the post-traumatic stress disorder, not being able to talk about all the fallout of things that are going on in the country is hugely damaging. Suddenly, I'm completely incoherent. China is a country where since 2011, there have been over 100 self-immolations, which is a horrifying thing to think about. But then it gets even worse when you consider that almost nobody is talking about this in China because the media is censored. And, on a meta level, you can't even talk about the fact that nobody is talking about this. So, just to put this in context, somewhere where there should be an issue where there should be a lot of outrage. I mean, I'll just bring this up in context of Tunisia, which kicked us all off. So back to the community, for a while, and I think, there's still traces of this, but there's been a really strong community on Twitter of Chinese activists from all across the board, from different, political agendas and all sorts of things. But Twitter has been this community, starting with Iran, with the Green Movement, or the Green Revolution. There were a lot of people, and I was involved with that, moving quickly to translate what they saw was happening in Iran, and then moving forward, first with Tunisia and then with Egypt. And I think people kind of got burnt out trying to keep up with what was going on in Egypt. So it kind of died off, the attention that there was in China. But it all centered around Twitter. And I mentioned Twitter because Twitter played, the key role in March 2011. I think following from the stuff that had started, the community that had built around people who were interested in what was going on in Iran and then Tunisia and Egypt. It's kind of an odd story. So there was a Twitter account that there are a lot of robot accounts in the Chinese language Twitter community that people set up, and they may have had plans that at some point this may become a way to to build money just through doing some sort of spam activity. So there was one Twitter account that was just it was a robot account. There was nobody, as far as you could tell, there was nobody running this account. It was probably feeding off of some RSS feed. And then one day, maybe it got hacked. It just occurred to me yesterday. I was thinking about that. Maybe somebody, captured the password or something. So there was this account that suddenly nobody had ever thought about. It suddenly said one day, in the context when everybody was thinking about what was going on in the Middle East, but not talking about it. Meet. I think it was a McDonald's in Beijing. They said meet at this time at a certain, meet on this day at a certain time at this McDonald's. And then suddenly because the way, because of the sort of the linguistic environment where, everyone knows that something's going on, but nobody's talking about it. There's a lot of coded messaging in the Chinese language Twitter community, this was one of the elephants in the room. So there was a sort of awkward spot where everyone was hoping that somebody would talk about it, but nobody was willing to take the first step. And that's a theme that's been, sort of consistent with. So it said, meet at this time on this date. I don't remember the exact date, but it was March 2011. And so, of course, the police were there, and the plainclothes police. They knew about this because it was on Twitter, and people got all excited, and they were retweeting it. So it became a very Chinese-style kind of protest. So people congregated on the spot, but nobody would stop. They would just walk right through, and they would do a loop around the block, and then they came back. And something similar happened in Shanghai too. But I think Shanghai was where a lot of people were arrested. I don't think there were any arrests made in Beijing at that time on the spot. There were much later. This became they have an idiom that you might know in China. So the crackdown always comes long after the fact, when things have cooled down a bit. And then in the city where I was living at the time, in Guangzhou, there was there's a park where protests sometimes happen, and there's a Starbucks right there. And I went, and people sat down at the Starbucks. It was kind of like this, whereas the Starbucks is behind you, and you're in the spot, and you can see all these kind of, these guys wearing black clothes, walking around smoking and looking tough. You figure they're plainclothes police, but you can also see the people who are nervously walking through, and they don't stop. They just walk by, and no crowd ever formed. That was it. People, actually, a friend who showed up, and we didn't talk about this before. We all had our own plans. We wanted to go. We just made our own plans independently. So it was kind of funny. We get there, everyone shows up. So it was you could say it was a protest with Chinese characteristics, to use a familiar term. On a bit of a tangent, one of the friends who showed up there, he was one of the people who was arrested later, after the fact, and he was just taken off, never charged with the crime, and he's a poet, and he has really long hair, and in Guangzhou, the city where I lived, it was kind of his signature thing. So the day he was released, we went to pick him up, and I hadn't thought about what he would look like when he came out, but when you go to jail, the first thing they do, they shave off all your fucking hair. So he came out, and that was a shock to see him. Having known him for years, suddenly he's bald. And we just hadn't anticipated that. Sorry?
Free haircut.
Free haircut.
Free haircut.
I wanted to go off on a bit of a tangent. So I guess that would be my high. Going back to this Twitter account, where, it's about that sort of awkward situation and how do you navigate that. And in China being a country where things don't really happen in public and people don't talk about their emotions in public, if I get a chance later, we put some together, we sketched out some ideas of sort of the emotional fallout of what happens when you can't talk about your emotions and things build up for years and years and years. So hopefully I get a chance to talk about that. And I have a low, too. A low point.
Thank you, John. Thank you. Many people studied revolution. Many people were saying, if between 1% and 5% of people goes on the street, then definitely this regime will be toppled, this regime will be changed. But it wasn't the case of Bahrain. Almost, I don't know what is the exact percentage, but Amira might tell us more about it, but it was much more than 10 or 15% of people were on the street back then. Bahrain was one of the most civil resistance protesters. Yet Saudi interfered, they sent all their missiles, they sent all their tanks, sorry, not missiles, tanks, to protect Bahrain. Amira was there, she was very happy when the revolution happened, maybe. Everything was going really nice, and then suddenly, things have started to shift. So I want to listen from Amira about the highs and lows, about Bahrain and also other Arab countries that were not mentioned today.
I come from Bahrain. Bahrain is I don't even know the word for it. It's a constituent democracy, or yeah, constituent monarchy. Is that what? It doesn't make sense to me, whatever that term is. Anyway, we do have a parliament, we do have elections, we have municipal elections, and we have a king, and we've had a prime minister for 43 years. I was not, contrary to what Mohamad is saying, I was not happy that we had a protest movement start in Bahrain, not because we did not have all the factors which made a revolution necessary. We have poverty, we have discrimination, we have corruption, we have all the things that would make a revolution and more, would make the ground right for revolution. But we also have something called fear. When you go into a revolution sort of situation, you know that there is a goal, a tangible goal at the end of it. With Bahrain, there was no sight and end. As a liberal person like me, I really want to walk like this in Bahrain. I don't want to wear an Iranian scarf or a Saudi veil, and I don't want any man to have any control over me, whether it's a father or a husband. I want to be a human being. And as bad as the regime is today, it allows me to do that. I have my personal freedom. I don't want, and I know this is wrong to say, considering all that my country has gone through and all that I have gone through, but I am worried. I am worried about change, and I don't know what to think of it. And I know that every time you think about it and try to reason, and it's like being treacherous to your people. Like, I want to be free, and I want to be free from religious shackles, and at the same time I want to be politically free. But for me to be politically free, I want to choose who will have control over me. Like, if we get those religious, what's the word for it, fanatics? Or even, you don't have a moderate religious person. Islam is, okay, I don't want to get into blasphemy. So you are torn between all those emotions. As Middle East and North Africa editor, I have another problem. I can talk about all the other revolutions, sort of, but I can't talk about Bahrain. In Bahrain, all the people who sided with the revolution, and I mean all, paid the price for it. You have the usual things like people who have been killed, and then you have people who have been jailed, and then you have people who have been forced out of work. And the government took pictures, like they used all the pictures which came from social media and literally circled people's faces. And all those people who had an active role or a not so active role, or I don't know, I wasn't there. I was at home listening to the boom 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 celebrations going on. I couldn't stomach going out and seeing. But people who went out say there was a feeling of euphoria. I experienced that euphoria when I went to Cairo. And on Friday, that's another thing about the revolutions, they're Friday revolutions. Every Friday was a day of rage and a day of anger. And we were very angry, and we still are, even though it's been 4 years of days of rages and anger. Let me go back to, so I'm not the protester type, but I felt a real nice feeling when I was in Cairo on a Friday, and we said, okay, let's just go to Tahrir Square, like as tourists. And I went there, and after the noon prayers, people started to gather, and it was just spontaneous. And there were different groups of people, and like the people that, oh, those are Ikhwan, we won't join them, and those are whatever. And then all the cool kids came, and it was Yasqat Hukm al-Askar, down with the military rule. And for someone who comes from a fear culture, a culture of fear, it was liberating, But I was too afraid to even enjoy it or stand there and chant because I was afraid somebody would take a video or a picture, and if it gets published in Bahrain, how would that look like? And this fear is a very strong feeling, and this fear paralyzes you, and this fear is self-defeating, and it really damages you on the long term. I haven't been able to write anything. Like, I do cover news, and my level of work has not been I haven't been as productive as I have been. My editors keep asking me to write things, but I cannot write. I cannot get that bottled. I can talk about it, I can talk about it, but I cannot express it in words, because those words will be like the rope I tie around my neck, and those are the words that will get me into trouble. Those are the words that will remain. I believe that the word is sacred. I became a journalist for a reason. I continue to write for a reason. I continue to encourage people to write and express themselves, but I can't do it myself because I don't want to get myself into trouble, or my family, or the people I love. When we gather in Bahrain in a room, there are 3 out of 5 people who have been imprisoned or were affected by what happened. Other than that, like, my work as an editor is like, there are countries I've given up on, and I shouldn't be saying this, but like, I'm Middle East and North Africa editor, but I can't cover Libya. When Libya was going on, we saw like the most horrific images, and you'd see all those videos and photographs coming out, and then you're supposed to live like a normal person. I remember seeing those videos and just breaking down and crying, and there is one of a building in like a rubble and just a little girl like a doll. And at that time when all this was happening, I was pregnant with my first child. So there I have a baby in my stomach waiting for the greatest event in my life and seeing all those dead children in the rubble. And they're real. A lot of our friends have been in jail, and when I talk about friends, not just friends and people I know in Bahrain, when I saw Lina last year in Jordan, Amman, I couldn't look her in the eye. Our friend AlHussaini, Egyptian blogger, was just arrested, and Alaa's son Khalid is the same age as my son Daniel, and I see Alaa's son Khalid, and I know that Khalid goes to bed.
Thank you, Amira. Please an applaud for Amira. Lina, you mentioned that revolution is a work in progress. You have mentioned that a revolution is a work in progress. It evolves and changes. We've seen a lot of tactics that might increase motivation for people. Comedy is one of them. Mockery is one of them. We've seen a lot of YouTube movies in a funny way, mocking Sisi, mocking different dictatorship. And this I've seen an increase in the motivation for people. We've seen Bassem Youssef's show that's been shut down, even though it's just a comedy show. What kind of tactics that you guys, all of you, that you think we should test, we should use more, so people can psychologically be better, feel better about themselves, and continue the hope, continue the motivation?
It's hard to make much sense after what Amira said and what she reminded us of, but I also, conceptually, I don't think, as a journalist, for example, I have a responsibility to make people feel better. I have a lot of empathy about the different sentiments that people are feeling in the wake of these events for the last 4 years. But sometimes I feel it's okay to be sad, and it's okay to understand that it's a difficult moment, and it's okay to feel sometimes disengaged, to opt out, to feel basically unwell, and I guess the agency of these revolutions is that they came out of these very personal moments of anger that many of us have been feeling. I'll say something about the humor because you raised it, but I also want to highlight the conversation we've had last year up until this massacre that I mentioned, after which people like Ale, including Ale himself, got arrested, and like in your case, our circle became all of a sudden, I mean, we suffer from solitude also. This is one of the main issues. Like, there are fewer and fewer people out there you can have these conversations with, but it feels bad saying this because, if we feel solitude, what do they feel in prison, really? So again, it's hard to make sense on this panel at this point. But this conversation I wanted to refer to is that there was this meme during the last couple of years right before this massacre I mentioned, which is basically, it says "Ilyas khiana," or which translates to English as "despair is betrayal." And we used to utter this word a lot, and in the spirit of motivating the people and mobilizing the people and reminding them of the importance again of the politics of hope. And then after that massacre, I felt like it's really violent to say this. It's a very violent expression. It's okay to feel despair. We have to come to terms with it, live with it, and wait for a different moment somehow. But manufacturing a state of hope in the times of hopelessness, I think, is borders crime, in my opinion. It's an extremely violent point. It doesn't take into account our friends in prison who are effectively in despair. We cannot talk about hope to these people. We cannot talk about how humor can be a tactic in order to mobilize the people when there is so much despair in actuality. And then to end on a note about humor, because you raised that point, I do think we've been using humor not necessarily tactically, but as part of our everyday life. We love everyone, not Egyptians only, and we don't have to utter a discourse of exceptionalism here. Everywhere in the world, people negotiate with everyday life with a mishmash of protesting, but also laughing at things, right? And essentially, there is an essential part of these revolutions where parts of our quotidian, parts of our everyday life has been basically deployed in order to contend the ruling regimes. It's really our everyday practice that became all of a sudden a site of an alternative power arrangement. And in that sense, humor was being utilized. Again, we don't need to exceptionalize it. It didn't just come out during the revolution, but what it needs to remind us of is that our everyday practice, the way we live our everyday life, the way we negotiate all the troubles and all the control regimes under which we're living online and offline, is really how these revolutions have emerged, rather than, high-end tactics and so on.
Thank you, Lina. And I think we don't have a lot of time, so we're going to stop here and open the questions for the audience. Please, is this mic working? Try.
Yeah, good afternoon. This is not a question. This is just a brief sharing because I really feel and sympathize with the experience of the people, the panelists, and the people that we are representing. Here in the Philippines, we've been with so much oppression and murder. And personally, I have experienced, I'm an activist. I have experienced losing my first husband because he was missing. I have experienced being the threat of assassination and colleagues dying, killing, being murdered, and missing. And it's sad because we activists are trying to change our system. We want to change a society for the betterment, for our kids, for the future generation. But the government and the state machinery are that brutal. They're trying to suppress people's aspiration for change. And I think one of the most, very important lessons as being activists or journalists is our trust for the people. Our trust that we can change our society. Because once we lose that hope, we lose that trust in ourselves, then everything will be darkness. And if there is the fear and the loss of hope, the loss of trust of the people that we can change our history, then nothing will happen. Powers that be will remain in power, and for so long a time, he will dominate the world. And I think that is one thing that we have to hold on as activists or journalists, that we may not change our country or our people in a lifetime, but in our small way, in our great small way, we have contributed in a society that is humane, democratic, and just. And I think this is our contribution, this is our legacy to the world. Thank you
so much. Thank you so much. One question, please. And if anyone wants to speak after, first please try to be brief. And if anyone wants to speak, please stand in line after her.
Firstly, I really wanted to thank the panelists for sharing the things, and I personally learned lots of things for myself. I come from Ukraine, and GB covered the Ukrainian Revolution of Dignity. And as you know, after our revolution, after the revolution's not over, right? Is it ever over? But after our protests ended, Russia started, incited a conflict inside their country in eastern Ukraine and occupied and annexed Crimea. And suddenly the reality changed for us. It was very easy in a sense to write about the revolution because we knew what to write and how to write about it. And all of a sudden we have this conflict in a country where we never had an armed conflict since our independence. So for me it was a very difficult transition, and that's why I thank you for sharing your stories during the summit. I personally, the courage of the people writing about these difficult things inspired me to write more. But one of the things that I learned to motivate myself to keep writing is that if sometimes after the revolution's conflicts happen, then the media immediately concentrates on them, and we have this narrative like, oh, all of the revolutions and aspirations for change lead to something terrible, like revolutions end badly. So don't have a revolution. Don't try to change anything because, a conflict is going to come out of it. So one of the things that motivate me is to show the other side, to say, okay, there's a conflict in eastern Ukraine, but look what we have achieved. Our media is more free. We had free elections. We have a government with new priorities. We have passed laws that for years we talked about, and we were hoping even to be able to pass them before. So what motivates you to continue covering? How do you find the positive, even when sometimes things are desperate or seem desperate? Thank you.
It's a good question. Thank you. Who else? Rami?
Yeah, hi. I'm Rami. I'm GB contributor. I came from Brazil. I'm originally from Syria. I passed by the Pearl Square when Bahrain was revolution. And I know the Bahraini people well. And I knew how the revolution started, and it's continuing still. My question is, in brief, Syrian revolution turned into very bloody conflict. How can we maintain our revolution peacefully? Like, what the hell we have tools to keep it peaceful? Thank you.
Thank you, Rami. So Nalis, and I think we're gonna end the questions here. Are you standing with?
Yeah.
Okay, please go ahead.
Okay. My name is Edwin Chong. I'm from Hong Kong. So obviously, it appears that I don't know whether we call it a movement or revolution anymore, or nothing at all. We're in kind of a low time. Actually, this morning when I was checking my Facebook, one of the main news was the Chinese, at least one of the Chinese government representatives saying exactly what the person was saying, that they'll start catching you after autumn, after fall. That's a saying, right? And that's starting. So one of the things, though, I kind of want to ask the panelists, through the ups and downs of these movements, the antagonism or the hostility with the police and the state and the police especially there's a high tension, but there are still good policemen, there's still good cops, there are still good people in the state. What, in terms of the journalists or especially citizen journalism view, how do we get these stories out? Are they meaningful? Are they, bad for the movement? Or what are your views about that specific point? Because it has been, battling myself and myself with some people in our movement in Hong Kong as well. It's tough to expose them as well, because they get tracked down. But it might throw a wrench into some of the things that the movement is trying to do. I think that's something that maybe as journalists on that front, maybe something that we might want to ask ourselves. Just a question.
Thank you.
Really quick. It's not really a question, but earlier when you were preparing the panel, I heard Amira say something really beautiful. She was talking about how she was confronted, maybe with Lina, about how they experienced the revolution at the same time and how the heights were the same and the low were the same. And so maybe if you could say that again, because it was really inspiring.
Okay, thank you guys very much. We're gonna try to be very brief in the answers as well. So we have what motivates you to keep doing what you're doing. We have how to make your revolution peaceful. We maintain it peaceful. We also have how to cover a revolution as journalists without exposing activists. I think this should be a session by itself. And there's a quote question by Nalis, which is, you want someone to repeat what you're saying. Please. Yeah. Yeah, who would like to answer any of these questions?
Yeah. So we'll give it in turns. So what motivates me? I get asked this question a lot, and I think it's the stories that I get to tell, and it's the people who make those stories that I get to tell that motivates me. Also, I feel that I have the responsibility and the privilege of writing their stories and also sharing them with the world, because not everyone has that opportunity, and not everyone in Azerbaijan, especially if you're a writer in Azerbaijan, you don't really have that privilege anymore. And being based abroad right now, I have that privilege. So that motivates me. How to make revolution peaceful? I think this still is a big question for the activists and organizers in Azerbaijan and Turkey, I would say. And that sort of kind of going back to what Amira was saying about fear and how that builds in people and how they're afraid of going out, and how that also amplifies the whole aspect of making this very peaceful and not turn into this violent outbreak. I mean, it's really, really hard and requires a lot of planning, and you really have to look at all these peaceful revolutions around the world, sort of this nonviolent civil resistance methods. And I think so far I've seen a lot of it in Azerbaijan and Turkey. The protesters in Azerbaijan, it's always about just a march, a quiet march, or some kind of protest with pictures or statements, but never an act of violence. I've never seen a Molotov cocktail thrown in any of the protests in Azerbaijan, even though the police claims the activists have, or even the police claims that they find those Molotov cocktails in the activist apartments when they come to arrest them. And in Turkey it was a bit tricky during the Gezi protest because you did have a group of people who were sort of a group within the group of protesters who was using Molotov cocktails, or they were clashing with the police and they would throw rocks at the police. But when you look at the bigger picture, the movement itself, the protest itself, the Occupy Gezi, as it was trending on Twitter, it was all about nonviolence and resistance. And the day, one of the days that I remember clearly is when, sorry, just quickly, I'll finish it. Is when I came to the square. The police was back in the square, and they were trying to take back the park. And there's this, the peaceful protesters are standing in the park and yelling at the ones who are throwing rocks and bottles with spirits at the police to stop, because police kept on throwing tear gas and using water cannons against them. And so there is this balance, and I think there are more people who want non-violence than violence.
Thank you so much. So we have 1 minute for each panelist to answer one of the questions if you want, or go through many of them.
No, I'll be brief and I won't answer everything. I do not think we are in a position, or we have to be in a position of how to make revolutions peaceful. I think when I hear this question, the issue of agency comes to mind. This is the real question. If the people want to be violent, then let it be. So I don't think we should concern ourselves with whether revolutions need to be peaceful or not. The case of Syria is a case of diminishing agency, but even at the time of the revolution, when there was more of a sense of agency, violence was somewhat of a chosen path, and this should be respected, in my opinion. And that leads me to the question about our relationship with the state and this antagonizing of the state and the police. I think this is the product of the crisis of the modern state as it exists, and its idea around the monopoly of the use of violence. So if this increasing and more widely expressed sense of antagonism towards the state apparatus, particularly in its police manifestations, since it's the apparatus of violence within the state, is an expression of this crisis. So again, we have to come to terms with it. And then finally, how do I keep going? I keep going. I created a newspaper, which is basically an attempt to organize and not only to produce knowledge in a progressive way, but more importantly, I don't so much dream of the return of the 18 days or of the revolution, or dream of a utopia, because utopias are dysfunctional. In my opinion, it's really a question, again, of how do we negotiate and how do we survive, and in that I find survival in many ways.
Annalisa, in preparing for the session, Lina and I compared notes, and the high for us, do you mind if I say this? The high for us was the fall of Ben Ali in Tunis, and the low for both of us was what happened at Rab'a in Cairo. Again, you see my escapism, like nothing to do with Bahrain. I keep myself busy with others. And the thing about this feeling is that those revolutions have created a whole class of people who felt exactly the same feelings for 4 years, like over different highs and lows of revolutions. And it is this feeling that has brought us together as Arab youth. Like for the first time, we are actually united over one issue, and we've gone through the same feelings and emotions, and these are things that nobody will take from us.
Thank you, Amir.
I'll be very quick. I think about the police question. For me, thinking about a revolution, that kind of goes into the territory of subversion, which I think is worth its weight in gold, because you want the police to be on your side, and you don't want to antagonize them. In a short answer, the second question about violence, and for China, the whole realm of theory of nonviolence seems to be more of a generational thing. It's something that people, younger kids, younger users, Twitter users, talk about the community. They don't talk about today. And there are people who put a lot of time in publishing in Chinese on the subject, but they're all very silent now or in prison. And the third question I wanted to, how do you keep going? For me, it's quite simple. What else are you going to do? Because the world's not going to fix itself.
Thank you so much, John. Arzu, Lina, Amira, John, thank you so much for expressing your feeling and for the knowledge that you shared with us. We love you, Amira. Thank you, everyone.